And we're on. So how's everybody doing today? Hope everyone's having a good day today. A guest that we have today for this episode, his name is Jake Disterhaupt. He's the strength and conditioning coordinator at St. Luke's in Duluth, Minnesota. I've known Jake for probably 7 years or so now. I think he does a great job over at St. Luke's, and I'll just kind of let him take it away from here and introduce himself, talk about how he ended up at St. Luke's, kind of his journey to get there. So, Jake, take it away.
Thanks, Will. And like Will said, I'm Jacob Disterhaupt, and I'm the strength conditioning program coordinator for the St. Luke's Hospital here in Duluth, Minnesota. And a little bit about how I got here. So I started as a student athlete for the University of North Dakota. I got my 5 years there. Throughout my time there, I interned with a track team, volleyball, softball team. After I received my bachelor's degree, I went and interned at Exos, Grand Forks' kind of high performance gym. You may be familiar with them. And there I built a pretty good relationship with the coaches, and I learned a lot. Then after that, I was enrolled in the graduate program for my master's. And I moved back to Minnesota from the University of North Dakota. Kind of job opening that was promised to me, but it kind of fell through. So I'm back at home. Then I actually worked at Anytime Fitness for 9 months, which was a great experience. And I highly recommend that any strength coach takes a step into a different field like personal training, because it's completely different. The individuals you work with are a lot different than student athletes at a Division I level. So after my 9 months there, I landed this position with St. Luke's Hospital, training youth athletes anywhere from junior high to occasionally I'll get a college caliber athlete or a junior hockey athlete. That's typically the largest individuals we get. So
Awesome.
that's a
Yeah. So one thing that Jake and I have in common is that we both work with youth athletes. So I'd say, what would you say, primarily your athletes, would you call them youth athletes or what?
Yeah, I call them youth because they're still in high school.
Yeah. So, and I also run a youth strength and conditioning program every summer. So we have that in common. And one thing that I've noticed that I like to do with the youth athletes, and even with college athletes as well, but more so with the youth, is that you kind of just take training or portray the training as games for them. I feel like it allows them to have more fun, and then they don't think about, I mean, most 13-year-old, 12-year-old kids don't want to go necessarily lift weights, and they get dropped off by their parents at the strength and conditioning camp, and they don't want to show up. They don't want to do anything. But then if you make it into a game, play field games like sharks and minnows, different types of tag variations with them, it allows them to kind of open up to you a little bit more and just have some fun. So I don't know if you've kind of noticed the same thing, witnessed the same thing with those athletes, or if, I mean, you probably have a great range of diversity within ages, genders, that with the kids that you work with. So yeah, how do you feel about that? Would you agree, disagree?
100%. I think it's a must for any youth program to incorporate fun into the strength conditioning, because I could bark at them all day to get these goblet squats and do them right, but they'll only be there for a week or two, maybe,
Yeah.
not even.
Yeah.
So we just go through our exercises, and we always try to end our conditioning in a fun way. So typically, that's the worst part for the kids. That's
So
what
how many groups do you typically see a day with your youth athletes, or I guess with all of them? What's your
Yeah,
typical day look like?
I think this throughout the year, during the school year, because I manage a fitness center, we're just in the high school. So throughout the school year, I'd say I run up to 5 groups. So one before school, 2 during school, and then 2 after. And then I kind of designate them to different teams based off of the time of year.
So how are those groups divided? Is it by age? So like certain ages come in the morning, or is it based on just their schedule? Yeah, what's that based on?
So the first group of the day is open to anyone, anywhere 7th grade and up. They're more than welcome. The training we do there is very broad, so it fits everyone. Then my 2 groups during the day are more geared towards the strength aspect, so more resistance training. And then my last 2 are typically one in-season sport and then one sports team, which is the season to come. So if it's fall, let's say October, first group will be football and the second group would be hockey.
Okay, so they are divided up into sports a little bit too, so that
Yep.
so then you're not having to program the same thing for everybody and then adjust on the fly. Basically, who shows up, you're gonna try to modify for each kid based on their sport. You have your own programs for each team. Is that correct?
Yep.
Okay.
Every different lifting session has their own program.
And how do you do things differently based on football, hockey, volleyball, the athletes you see, or even by age? How do you do things differently by age, if you do anything different at all?
So by age, there's a little bit by age. It's more of how developed they are in the weight room. Um, Often I have 2 programs per group. I have a beginner level one and a more advanced one. In the beginner one, you're going to get a lot of your goblet squats, some body weight stuff, glute bridges, something that's not as advanced. And then the next group, they'll have the RDLs, the back squat, front squat type thing. So the first session after school, so the in-season group, they're going to be working on more of like 4 sets, 3 reps of your big core lifts, so your back squat, bench, overhead press, something like that. Pushing the weight a little bit. I try to keep it around 80%. Because I want them to stay strong in season, but reduce the soreness. So those sessions are typically a little bit shorter compared to the second session, which it kind of depends where we are in the program. I try to start that second group 8 weeks before their season starts, so we can go through the 4 phases of training: general prep, hypertrophy, strength, and power. So the second group's a lot more diverse.
So when you have those beginner kids come in, do you do some sort of assessment with them, or do you kind of just give them your general program and then regress where you need to see that they need to be regressed from? Like if you have a back squat, do you just say, okay, this kid's not ready to back squat, we're going to goblet squat them? Or how do you take us through how you end up programming for the beginner kids? Because I'd assume it's going to be tough because you probably have some beginner kids who can pick it up right away and some beginner kids who lag behind a little bit. So then you, at some point, you're going to have to progress some people or you hold some other people back. So how do
That's
you
probably
handle that
one of
situation?
the hard parts of the job, just because let's say you and I were in 7th grade and we show up, I've never touched a weight, but you're pretty experienced.
Yeah.
So I just started a really big warm up, and during that warm up, you can kind of tell. And then I'll have them warm up with goblet squats, let's say, or maxing back squat. Because I like to max bench and back squat at the start of every program. That way I can put in the weights for the kids, and then they're forced to progressively overload. I learned that lesson. So we'll warm them up. By the end of the warm up, doing bodyweight squats and prisoner squats, I can kind of get a tell of who's done these movement patterns before, who hasn't. Then I'll start warming up with a goblet squat, more of a light dumbbell, lighter kettlebell. And if they can't perform a goblet squat, that's where we stop. I tell them, here I want you to progress in weight just a little bit, and then once their form starts to dwindle or go away, I'll write that weight down so I can program a weight for their goblet squats. But say the one kid who is more advanced, the goblet squats look great, then maybe I'll move him to a front squat and a back squat.
So then later on in the training cycle, I guess, if some kids are advancing more than other kids, do you still write the same program for them and you just call it a squat, and then certain kids know that they're now graduated to a front squat or a back squat, and certain kids just know they're still goblet squatting, and then they follow the same set and rep scheme? Or is that
So
touch on
the reps and sets the same.
okay.
The only thing that's different is the exercise itself. So let's say, once again, you were that kid who showed up ready to go. I will give you a different sheet that says advanced on it. And
Okay.
then you will all get a beginner sheet. And then let's say I catch up right away. I'll notice it, and then I'll upgrade the kid to the advanced sheet.
Yeah. So what I do with the kids, the youth kids that I work with, and I don't know how big your groups are, but last summer I only had 9 kids. So it was pretty easy to manage. So what I did when I gave them their training card, it just said squat on it. And then everybody started with a goblet squat for their first set. And then you can figure out who's done this before, who can pick it up real quickly. So if they look good on their first couple of sets of goblet squat, I'll tell these other kids, hey, or I'll ask them, hey, have you squatted with a barbell before? Have you done a front squat, a back squat? If the answer is yes, I usually say, okay, we're just going to let you go do your back squat or front squat next. And if there's an issue that I see with it, I'll kind of take care of it when that happens. But if they say they've done it before and they look good, I'll kind of just let them go. Whereas the other kids, if they don't look so good, I'll keep them goblet squatting. So they'll follow the same program, just with the different exercises. So basically the same thing you do. And then when on the issue of technique, um, I think for the most part, we don't have to do much aside just cue them a little bit here and there. Because I think for the most part, they'll self-organize. I mean, they're so young and plastic as it is that just the more reps they do, they're just going to figure it out. Maybe not day one, maybe not day two, but 2-3 weeks into the program, they're kind of going to figure it out, and they're going to self-organize and understand how their body's supposed to move in these movements. So I would say for the group I had last summer, everybody was back squatting by week 2, maybe week 3. So that's kind of the way I did it. And then same thing with like with deadlift. Most kids can kind of figure out how to deadlift if we just put those 10-pound, those big 10-pound bumper plates on the bar. They're strong enough to pick it up. So it's just getting them to organize their body in a way that they're supposed to start the deadlift in a certain way, figure that out, and then move the bar in a certain way, keeping the bar close to them, not turning the deadlift into a squat and all that kind of good stuff. So we probably approach that the same way. So just tell us a little bit as far as exercise selection, what you do with the kids. I don't know, do you introduce them to Olympic lifting? Do you basically stick to the main barbell movements? Do you stick to more dumbbell movements since they're younger? Just what's your philosophy on that?
So I definitely introduce them to Olympic lifting. We don't do any snatches. So with these kids with a loaded barbell above their head and a grip that they're not familiar with, I'm just not comfortable doing that with them. With the fitness center we don't have that much space between racks, so I just have a lack of trust.
Yeah, I've been there.
but cleans, we will push jerk and push press. It's not quite as advanced as a snatch, so they actually handle that really well. But as far as barbell unilateral work versus bilateral, it kind of changes just a little bit depending on if they're males or females. I try to teach a lot, and what I've noticed is when I'm managing the fitness center and it's after school hours and I don't have a team, the boys walk in, they just go straight to the barbell.
Yeah.
And the girls, they'll just grab a mat, maybe a dumbbell, and kind of by nature, they're already doing bilateral work, females. And all the boys are unilateral work, barbells. So that would be one of the very few changes I have when it comes to training a different gender, male or female. But I usually have one barbell lift, or I always do.
Per session?
Yes.
Okay.
For sure. So usually it's the bench, back squat, what I call our core lift. And then after that, it's a lot of unilateral exercises. We hammer our unilateral leg strength. So reverse lunges, split squats, things like that. We will use a barbell to help load that single leg exercise. It's kind of a little bit about the barbell versus unilateral for myself.
Yeah. So I haven't used any Olympic movements or derivatives with the youth athletes that I've worked with the last 2 summers. However, in my opinion, I think learning how to push jerk or split jerk, probably push jerk, is actually fairly easy and probably the easiest to learn for most people. So I'm thinking this summer, maybe introduce, first we have to overhead press and push press, but thinking of maybe introducing them to a variation of a jerk. The bar's not moving through that great of a range of motions, just from a front rack to an overhead position. Um, and I think from what I've seen, it's fairly easy for most people to pick up. And as long as you're not going too heavy, that's when people are going too heavy, that's when they don't commit to getting out of the bar and they reach out over in front of them, and then that's where kind of shit goes sideways. But I'm thinking about doing that a little bit this summer with my athletes. But
Well, you should. When I teach like a push jerk or push press, I like to start with a single arm dumbbell push press.
yeah,
It's really easy. Not two dumbbells, but with one arm, it's very simple for them to correct their body with the
yeah,
one.
yeah,
So
yeah.
2 weeks and then move to a barbell push press.
Mm-hmm.
I agree with you. I think it's the easiest Olympic lift to
Yeah.
teach a youth athlete.
And then the other thing, which I have no plans on snatching my youth athletes, but I actually have an opinion that most people don't, is that I think learning how to snatch first before you learn how to clean is a more appropriate way of teaching Olympic movements to kids. I just think if you can get someone, even if it's from the hang, to learn how to finish your pull, get full hip extension, knee extension, that triple extension that we always talk about, with a big, powerful shrug with the hands wide, that bar is going to make contact so much higher on your hips than it would be if you were cleaning. And so if you can get someone to learn how to finish a pull with your snatch, then after that, you try to teach them how to finish a pull with their clean, it's going to translate a lot quicker than if you teach someone how to clean first and then snatch after, because they're going to want to finish their pull early and make contact lower on their thighs than if they were snatching the bar or cleaning the bar with a closer grip. So I don't know if you would agree, if disagree, but that's something that I've thought about before. So
I really like kettlebell swings when it comes
yeah.
to teaching kids how to use their hips, because you'd be awfully surprised at how many kids don't understand when you say, hey, you need to thrust your hips forward, you need to
hinge pattern.
Hit
Yeah.
the waist and then shoot those hips forward in explosive movement. I always start with kettlebell swing, and then when I teach them, just a hang clean pull, I can cue them just like a kettlebell swing. You're gonna chest up, hips back, a little bend in those knees, and then snap those hips forward, just like a kettlebell swing. That is shown that it's very effective.
Yeah.
Because when I first got there, I was almost taught them as two different exercises.
Yeah.
And then I learned that, if you can kettlebell swing, you can clean pull.
Mm-hmm.
The movement's very similar.
Yeah.
So that's what I do. But that's very interesting, that the snatch pull versus clean pull or concept.
Yeah. So Jake, touch a little bit on like your general training philosophy. Do you program for your athletes to be good at just general athletic abilities, such as develop strength, speed, power, or do you focus on the actual sport that they play and try to focus on specific qualities they need for their sport? Or do you treat them, do you go human, athlete, sport, or what's the progression you use for your athletes there?
So working with all these youth athletes, I keep it very general. I'm looking to obviously create the strongest athletes, the fastest and quickest, and jump the highest. But I do have some change based in sport. It's not too much of the exercises. It's more of the stretches or like the injury prevention side of things. So
rehab type stuff.
Yeah, prehab type stuff. So with a lot of female athletes, I'll do a lot of lateral band walks or monster walks, just trying to control the knee as much as possible. But outside of the very little training difference for females, I like to divide it field athletes versus like a court or an arena athlete, because sports like obviously track, but football, soccer, lacrosse are just a handful of sports that you actually reach top speed. Mm-hmm. I like to throw in a little extra hamstring work.
Okay.
Typically it's like I call it a hamstring bridge. It's like a glute bridge, but your feeters walked out a little bit farther. Just
almost like a straight-legged bridge.
Yeah, very close to straight-legged.
Yeah.
So I'll try to add another hamstring exercise, 1 or 2 in per week. But outside of that, I don't differ the training too much based off sport.
Yeah. So you're primarily working with youth athletes now. You've interned at a Division I level with college athletes, and then you also spent some time with Exos. Was that for 1 year? How long were you with Exos for?
I believe it was 3 months.
Okay.
It was
So
summer.
so Exos, for people who don't know, is a private facility. There's locations all across the country, but it's a private facility focused or geared for sports performance for athletes, but they also do some work with general population. So seeing with the career you have now working with athletes, but youth athletes versus what you saw in Division I level versus what you saw at Exos, what are the differences you've seen between the three areas you've been to?
The training philosophies between the three places are very different. Mainly Exos is the different one. Obviously,
Okay, how so? Like, what was so much different about Exos?
With my program and at the University of North Dakota, we pushed a lot of weight, a lot of
Yeah.
barbell stuff, a lot of heavy lunges, a lot of heavy hamstring work. There, they did a lot of plyometrics and a lot of movement geared exercises. And then
Do you know why? Is that explain or what the reason for that is?
so I don't know if it was just Anthony Mirando, who he was the director of strength conditioning at the Exos I was. I don't know if that was just his program. I know Exos has a little bit to do with it, as
Mm-hmm.
far as the warm up and some of the plyometrics they choose and the progressions they use. But I think Anthony just believed that, as strength conditioning, our job is to enhance their movement, which is very
Okay.
true. Everything we do is
Yeah. Yep.
movement. But he practiced the movement itself, where for myself and maybe you a little bit, I like to push weight to enhance their movement because I know, if you got a person who
For
can
sure.
squat 400 pounds, odds are their 10-yard sprint's going to be pretty darn fast.
I think the intent of the movement's gonna transfer into sports much more than the movement quality, which I kind of think's a bogus term a little bit. But no, I would totally agree. Just I think having load and velocity is going to transfer a lot more into sports performance than movement quality per se.
And
So
I agree completely. That's
yeah.
kind of the design of my program as well,
Mm-hmm.
where I don't disagree with Exos because I
Right.
learned a lot there,
Yeah.
but they would hardly ever touch a barbell.
Mm-hmm.
The
So
whole
what was a typical training plan over at Exos like?
So I believe the sessions were about 1 hour 15, and it was evenly split between. They probably spent 10 minutes for the prehab warm up.
Okay.
They spent probably 20 minutes on plyometrics, 20 minutes on their resistance training, which consisted a lot of unilateral exercises. So again, I think deadlift is the only bilateral exercise I saw there, or only barbell exercise I saw there.
Okay.
We did goblet squat. And then they would spend time conditioning. So they stepped away from the resistance training more than what I'm used to. So for my program, I'd say 60% of the time for resistance training for
Yeah.
sure.
What caliber athletes did they have? Because I know they had when you were there. Because I know they've had NHL guys come through. They've had Division I to Division III athletes, and even high school. So when you were there, what type of caliber athletes did you see at the sessions you were working with?
So they had their youth session as well, just kind of similar to us, anywhere
Mm-hmm.
from 7th grade to 12th grade. But they also had their elite group, which was Division I hockey players who were there on the off season, a couple overseas professional hockey players, and then the Lamoureux twins, who were 2 Olympic
Mm-hmm.
athletes. So it was a lot of fun watching them because obviously the caliber of athlete between those 2 Olympians and the high
Right.
school was so different, but
Yeah.
they didn't train that much different.
Okay.
Obviously, they pushed the weight the weight was heavier, and they worked a lot in the transverse plane with the
Okay.
elite group.
Was that an intentional thing, like trying to get rotational work in? Okay. Yeah.
They, a lot of push pull machines on the Kaisers,
Okay.
a lot of anti rotations
Yeah.
as well.
Yeah. I think when you're working with someone who's at that high of a level, like an Olympic caliber athlete, then I think you can really get specific into uh, sport specificity or what you want to do, and maybe you don't have to load as much. Um, where am I going with this? I think when you're working with an athlete that is at that caliber, you probably just need to stimulate more so push for a strength adaptation or push for a cross-sectional muscle cross-sectional area adaptation. Maybe you don't need to put on muscle and
Mm-hmm.
improve maximum force output, but you probably should want to at least stimulate it so it doesn't go away, and then obviously work on the specific qualities for your sport. But
Gotcha.
I don't really see the purpose for that for definitely high school kids, and then even working at a Division I school now, I don't see the purpose for that for most of these Division I athletes. I just their training age isn't high enough. They don't have the capacity for it, and I haven't seen it myself. But yeah, definitely when you're working with an Olympic athlete or professional that's they're at the top of their game, I can definitely see a use for changing the focus of training a little bit. So
Yeah, the mode of training those high caliber athletes, it changes, like you said, because they're already at the very top.
yeah.
So if they progress even the smallest little bit, that's a huge step for them. So
Hmm.
in my eyes, a lot of what they were doing is geared towards, okay, they just can't get hurt now.
Yeah.
They're already well above and beyond a lot of people in the world, and
Hmm.
their training age is so developed that they're probably not going to become that much faster or that much
Right,
better.
right. Yeah, yeah. You give them a performance test, a performance measurement like a vertical jump or a 10-yard split. Just what's the extra half inch or what's the extra 0.04 you're going to take off the 10-yard split actually going to do for them in their sport? So,
Right. So that when you reach that point, I agree. Then it's okay. Well, now we need to look at things that translate to skating,
right.
your shot, and honestly, injury prevention as much as possible because they can't
Hmm.
afford to get hurt because that is their career now.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was a
Um,
great experience.
yeah. So another question I had for you is there anything that you've started to do with your athletes that you thought was kind of a waste of time a year or two ago, or is there anything that you stopped doing with your athletes that you thought was a great thing to do, but now you've changed your mind on that you think is I don't need to do that anymore, or look back and think that was kind of dumb, or anything of that nature?
Oh, I actually right before all this stuff happened, the coronavirus stuff, I was looking back to my old programs and just how general they were. So I've definitely incorporated more before the resistance training. So when we talk about prehab, 2 exercises before we actually start, kind of focused on one's usually on injury prevention, and then the other one's kind of explosive related, whether it's a depth to drop or a box jump or a split squat jump or lunge jump and something of that sorts. Um, I've also incorporated more static stretching. That's probably the biggest.
Okay. Yeah. Well,
So,
why the static stretching?
so I used to be a big believer on, if you practice your goblet squats, your back squats to a full range
Hmm.
of motion and they're controlled, that you would become more mobile and more flexible, which I think is still the case. Don't get me wrong.
Hmm.
But after having that mindset for my year and a half with all these youth athletes, I was noticing that some things weren't changing with primarily the guys
Hmm.
as far as upper body mobility goes. So we started incorporating floor slides, a lot of hip flexor stretches, lunge stretches, just to loosen them up. And after doing that for a couple of weeks, I started to see a little bit of change. So now we do it with every single group.
Yeah.
We warm up, we get our plyos, our resistance training, um, and we always designate at least 5 minutes to static stretching.
And would that be prior to training or post training?
That's always at the end.
At the
So I'm
end?
doing static stretching before we lift. That's
Okay.
always what we end with. So
Okay.
usually we get done with their last triple pair or their last circuit, and then gather around. All right, get into your lunges. We hammer the hip flexors twice, aiming at the shoulders, and the stretches change a little bit, whether
Yeah.
males or females. That's another
Yeah.
alteration I have.
It's funny that you say that because I was definitely a few years ago, even probably less than a year ago, on the anti-stretching, stretching's a waste of time, stretching does nothing for you on that train. And now just from an anecdotal perspective, I started incorporating it into myself. And yeah, this isn't backed by any sort of literature, but I feel better after I stretch a little bit. Um, and there's plenty of people that would report that as well. And then one big thing with the literature on stretching is that there's never been a method of measuring the magnitude of the stretch. So like all these studies that talk about stretching did not improve range of motion, or stretching did not improve some sort of performance measurement. Well, those, we don't know if the subjects in those studies are stretching hard or if they're just kind of going through the motions. So there's no actual degree in which we're measuring the magnitude of the stretch. So I think a lot of those studies are, I don't want to say bogus, but they don't necessarily mean anything, because when we're talking about interventions with a strength program, we're recording the loads that they use, we're recording the volume that's used, we're recording the frequency that's used. Where you look at stretching or mobility protocols, there's never a way to measure the magnitude of the stretch. So that's something that I want to see, is a study that's done where they can actually measure that and then put an intervention in and measure the change in range of motion or elasticity in muscle, et cetera, all that stuff. So
Yeah, I would read it for sure.
yeah, because I've changed my mind on that a ton. Um, and so what I do with my athletes as far as stretching goes is I don't necessarily program stretching in for them, but at the end of every session, I give them 5 minutes, and I just call it a cool down period, because there's a lot of, there's a placebo effect that goes into stretching or foam rolling or whatever. But I would never want to tell an athlete that doesn't work,
Yeah,
because you're not doing anything for them. So if, yeah, maybe the literature is there on foam rolling, but if a kid wants to foam roll for 5 minutes and he feels better and he thinks it's working, why would you take that away?
yeah. Don't
So
shut something down. Be more
yeah.
positive.
So
At least
so
they're doing
what's that?
it. At least the kid's doing it. He's doing
Yeah.
something. He's
Yeah.
taking the time to be concerned about how flexible he is. So
Yeah.
yeah,
So
definitely.
yeah, so what I do is I give them 3 to 5 minutes, and I let them foam roll if they want. I let them stretch if they want. We'll do some body weight isometrics if they want. We'll do breathing exercises if they want. I'm not necessarily big on the breathing stuff, but I think if they think it works and they feel more relaxed, probably shifting into from sympathetic state to a parasympathetic state, that's probably a good thing after training. So I like that you mentioned the static stretching, because that just kind of got me thinking about all this other stuff too. So yeah, I've changed my mind a ton on the stretching and the mobility work in the last few years. Um, I don't know if you have anything else to add on that on top of that.
No, the athletes always come to me, and well, they originally started asking for it, and I was like, there's something you can do on your own time.
Yeah.
They A lot of times they don't know exactly what they should be stretching or
Mm-hmm.
how long should they be holding it. So
Yeah.
little things like that. So one day we just did it as a group. They loved it. So yeah,
Yeah.
we're going.
So I work with tennis players as well, male and female tennis players, and they love stretching. So like they would rather come into the weight room, skip the lift, and just go into stretching. So I don't understand the point of doing a lift and then saying we're not going to stretch when that's what they love to do. They love taking the Theraguns and massaging each other at the end. Like, I think if they think it's working, it's probably working. And if they think it's working, but it's not working, it's probably not doing them any harm. So I
Well, I
have
mean,
no issue with
I'm
any of that
surprised
stuff.
at what we said about youth kids in games.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or if they enjoy it, let them have it. Like,
Yeah.
you need to take it away from them. If whether it's placebo or if it actually benefits them, if they're getting something out of it,
Hmm.
don't stop it.
Yeah.
Encourage it.
Yeah. Is there anything else that you think you've kind of changed your mind or done a 180 on over the last couple of years?
Stretching is the big one.
Yeah.
Um, I used to. Well, I got another one. I used to always think cleans and jerk was the only way to train explosive movements. But now
Hmm.
I've started programming weighted jumps,
Hmm.
and especially with these kids, it's weighted squat jump has
Hmm.
been probably one of the biggest tools I've used, especially in the general prep phase. Between that and the kettlebell swing, it's kind of up in the air.
How long do you typically have athletes for? Do you have them for 2 years, 3 years, or is it typically you have them for 6 months and then they go somewhere else?
It it kind of changes. It's almost more on an individual basis because
Okay.
if a kid has completely bought in to strength conditioning, then they could see me year round, summer, before school, in the fall and the spring. But if let's say a kid was just in a sport and he had to see me because the team came, I mean,
Hmm.
he may only see me once or twice
Yeah.
season or 1 or 2 seasons throughout the year.
Yeah.
So
Well,
that changed.
that's definitely gonna affect the way you program for somebody if with
It,
how
it
much
doesn't.
you can see them and how long you'll actually have a relationship for, whether it's gonna be a few months or it's gonna be 4 years. So
Yeah,
yeah.
it makes things a little more difficult because I'll get a junior or a senior who they go into the weight room on their own, and then they'll step into one of my programs thinking that they know all these movements. They know how to hit
Yeah.
correctly and the squat correctly.
Hmm.
So when I tell a kid, you need a goblet squat while everyone else is front squatting, then
Ego shot.
yeah, it's a shot to the ego, and the kids
Yeah.
typically don't handle it very well.
Yeah.
Um, but I'd rather have them start lower than have them start front squatting with their friends and have to go to them and tell them like, hey, you got
Yeah.
to rest. So that's
Yeah. Yeah. No, I would totally agree with that. And I was one of those kids myself, so I
I was,
can't really,
I
I'm
was
not
too.
gonna, can't bash some kid like that when that was me. It probably still is me if I'm being honest. So, um,
I definitely have my favorite things too, and bench is still one of those favorite things.
yeah,
I give the kids a hard time because they'll. That's another thing that's kind of challenging is the kid will work with me, they'll bench, and then they'll try to bench later that day.
yeah.
To tell them that's probably not the best thing for you. Maybe wait
Not the
3
most conducive thing to
you should
performance or
like
training
later.
adaptation. Yeah. Well, I think that's kind of wrapping up the time here, Jake. So, I appreciate you being on. If you have any final thoughts you'd like to mention.
No, this is great. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, man. So just so you can tell our audience where they can find you, what's your Instagram, what's your Twitter handle? I'll put all this in the description below as I post it as well, but just so you
If
can
you ever
kind of
want to find me, you can look me up on Instagram or Twitter. You can just type in Jacob Disterhaupt, Jacob, my last name Disterhaupt. I'll pop up. That's
awesome.
not a very common last name, so you'll probably find me right away.
Awesome. Well, I think there's a good conversation. I hope people listening got something out of it. But appreciate you taking the time to be on.
Yeah, thanks for
It was
having me.
fun. It's fun having you.
It was
Uh,
fun. If anyone has questions, please email me. I'm more than happy to talk about anything that I said.
awesome. Thanks, Jake.
You're
Appreciate it,
welcome.
man.
Take care.